Hi, welcome to JDBD TV. Tension or high between Iran and Israel, as IT spill over into the second week of bombing on the both side. A few new depot in Israel has been hit by a ballistic missile as Iran continues strike on Israel. A nuclear site in Iran has been hit by missile for the second time. Israel says IT will not stop until all nuclear site in Iran is gone.
Officials say a nuclear site in Isfahan province has been attacked by Israel twice overnight. The International Atomic Energy Agency says a centrifuge manufacturing workshop was hit there. Iranian officials say some damage was caused, but there were no radiation leaks and no one was hurt. The IAEA also says there was no nuclear material at the site. Iran's confirmed the site was targeted and said the attack triggered air defense systems in the region. Iran's health ministry says at least 430 people have been killed since the conflict began. Speaking at a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran remains open to dialogue with the US, but Israel must stop its attacks first.
Diplomacy can work. It worked in the past and it can work in the future. But in order for us to come back to diplomacy, the aggression should be stopped. It is obvious I cannot go to negotiation with the United States when our people are under bombardments, under the support of the United States. We have come, unfortunately, to the conclusion that the United States has been in this aggression from the beginning.
Iran's been firing waves of drones at Israel in retaliation. Israeli ambulance services say no one was hurt when a drone fell on a residential building in Beit Shean in the north. Israel says it's intercepted around 400 Iranian drones since the conflict began. Well, Bernard Smith is in Amman for us. First, we're going to go to Tawhid Asadi in the Iranian capital, Tehran. So let's talk about the diplomatic efforts that are going on the sidelines of the ongoing tit-for-tat missile strikes that have been happening. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, doing this round of diplomacy. He's in Geneva, now he's in Istanbul. What's he trying to achieve with that?
Well, I think the first and foremost important objective that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is trying to achieve is that he tries to send out this message to the world that Iran is not closing the doors for diplomacy. This is what we heard from him, from the spokesperson for the government and other Iranian officials. Meanwhile, we have to keep in mind that Iranians are saying that they're not going to negotiate. When he was in Geneva, he said, I'm not here for talks, I'm here to listen. At request of Europeans, I have been invited to this meeting. And then again, we heard related statements from Iranian Foreign Minister, and that's saying that as long as Israeli strikes continue, we're going to strike back, and there's going to be no room for any probable negotiations between Iran, Europe, and Europeans or the Americans. Also, Iranian Foreign Minister is saying that we were in the middle of a negotiation when we were attacked, and that's something that decreases the hope for diplomacy to settle down the issues.
You've been talking to us over the last few days about the level of evacuations, and we've seen some of the pictures as well of people leaving the main cities in Iran. Just talk to us about what daily life is like there.
Well, the thing is that we see still a continuation of Israeli strikes. Today we've got reports from Isfahan, from Mashhad, from Ahvaz, and from Qom, where Ehsan Qasemi was killed, a 16-year-old student, as a result of Israeli strikes. The daily life is affected as a result of these strikes. That goes without saying. And people are saying that this is not the nuclear facilities or military complexes being targeted, but the very ordinary citizens are seeing actually residential areas being targeted by the Israelis. But still, we have been witnessing a combination of different sentiments among people. First and foremost, we can see a strong increasing sentiment of anger among people pertaining to the Israeli strikes. Also, we've got this sort of anxiety among a proportion of the population. We know that Tehran, a city that hosts at least 10 million people, part of that population have decided to leave the city. But today, Saturday, which is the first day of Iranian week, we saw at least relatively more cars, more people when we were out at the streets. Also, in addition to this anger and anxiety, and as well as we've got another sentiment, which is solidarity. Yesterday, we've got this nationwide demonstrations across the country in Tehran, in different cities, big and small. People came out to streets, regardless of these strikes taking place, to protest against the continuation of Israeli strikes.
Tawhid Azadi talking to us there from Tehran. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Bernard Smith. He's in Jordan's capital. He's in Amman because Israel's government's banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So Bernard, Iran may well be insisting that Israel has to stop the attacks before talks can begin. Is there any indication that Israel could be willing to do that?
Not at the moment, Rob. Remember, this opportunity to attack Iran's nuclear capabilities has been something Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been waiting for his entire political career. Israel's military says it still has many more targets it can hit, it wants to hit. It's clear that their campaign has broadened beyond nuclear installations, beyond top scientists, beyond missile launching places. But Israel's military had said only just last Tuesday that this campaign it would expect to take a week or two for Israel to achieve its objectives. Well, that changed on Friday when the chief of the general staff, he warned Israelis that they must be ready for a prolonged campaign. And the suggestion is that change in advice is coming because Donald Trump said he wants to wait up to 2 weeks before deciding whether to give the Americans this bunker-busting bomb that they say they need to try and destroy these centrifuges in this Fordham mountain.
We were mentioning earlier Iran's launched more drones towards Israel. It's day 9 of the conflict. Some of them have hit areas in the north and in Tel Aviv. What more details do we have about those missile strikes?
Day 9, we have reports, yes, of drones being launched earlier today. No reports of ballistic missiles, as far as I understand today. And one of those drones did hit a residential area in the north of the country. In all, Israel's military says 450 missiles have been fired at Israel from Iran and some 400 plus drones. The locations of where they hit is heavily censored by the Israeli military because they don't want to show the Iranians whether the missiles have hit on target or not. So pictures coming out are carefully controlled. However, they acknowledge that about 50 impact sites. This will be impacts from either direct hits or from shrapnel, from debris that falls down from intercepted weapons. The Israelis say that about 5 to 10% of missiles fired by Iran, this is from Israel's military, leak through. And some are allowed to leak through, if you like, because they know they're going to fall on open ground, so they don't want to waste interceptor weapons on them. Rob.
Bernard Smith in Jordan's capital, Amman. Bernard, thank you very much indeed. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has told delegates at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit in Istanbul that after devastating Gaza, Israel is now expanding its aggression.
Şimdi de İsrail'in devlet terörüne.
Since the 13th of June, Israel's state terrorism has now been experienced by our neighbour Iran. I'd like to say the following clearly. With all these attacks, the Netanyahu government's proved it is the biggest obstacle to regional peace. I strongly condemn Israel's attacks on Iran. On behalf of my country and my nation, I offer my condolences to our Iranian brothers and sisters who lost their lives in Israel's terrorist attacks, bombings and assassinations.
Members of the Gulf Cooperation Council are telling the UN's nuclear watchdog they're concerned about Iran's nuclear facilities. And the warning comes after the Israeli military said it had struck the Bushehr nuclear facility. Bushehr is the only operating nuclear power plant in the country, and it sits on the Gulf coast. Ambassadors have told the International Atomic Energy Agency there could be dangerous repercussions if nuclear facilities are targeted. Well, the threats of regime change hanging over Iran in this latest conflict echo a dark legacy of Western influence. Stretching back decades, the US and Britain and other foreign powers have tried to manage Iran's internal politics. Behrad Mahichi takes a look back at the toll it's taken on the country.
Talk of regime change by way of foreign intervention has dominated the news agenda over the past week, but history offers cautionary tales. The US-led invasion of Iraq, NATO's intervention in Libya, but also in Iran, where the US and UK sponsored regime change, ousting its prime minister decades ago. It began in the early 1900s. The British began developing Iran's oil industry in exchange for total control over exploration and sales, creating the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later known as British Petroleum. Iran's vast oil reserves would be under British control for the next half-century, handing London double the revenue compared to that of Iran. But there was growing resentment. In the 1950s, a wave of nationalist voices began dominating Iran's parliament, led by Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, once Time magazine's Person of the Year, who took office on a platform to reduce the powers of the Shah and to nationalize Iran's oil industry, saying in a speech, "With the oil revenue, we could meet our entire budget and combat poverty, disease, and backwardness among our people." In Iran, the move was seen as a bold step towards economic sovereignty, but in Britain, a violation of its interests. In 1953, Britain convinced the US to assist in orchestrating a coup against Mossadegh in a covert operation of planting propaganda, fueling riots, and propping up military generals, ultimately removing Mossadegh from power and restoring the reign of the Shah, who had briefly fled Iran. Though it brewed unforeseen consequences, planted the seeds of anti-Westernism, fueling the view that Iran had become simply a client of the West. Sentiments that grew, eventually contributing to the Islamic Revolution in 1979, a revolution that toppled 2,500 years of monarchy, replaced by a government with suspicion of the West ingrained in its worldview. Foreign meddling, not so much a success, but rather a setback, later admitted by those responsible.
The Eisenhower administration believed its actions were justified for strategic reasons, but the coup was clearly a setback for Iran's political development.
And as history threatens to repeat itself once more, a visceral aversion to foreign intervention remains woven.
He's an associate professor of global history and history of the Middle East and North Africa at the University of Turin. He's joining us live from Rome. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. What is there in Iran's history that gives us an indication about whether there is a possibility of regime change in Iran today?
Let me remind you that Iran is the country which hosted the first constitutional revolution in the history of entire Asia. So we are speaking about a country that's a very rich history, and also in terms of constitutional history. This occurred 14 years later, after the 1891 Tobacco Revolt, which was the first form of organized resistance to fight Western expansionism in Persia. And this was made in order to take a number of advantageous concessions that were granted by the Shah, Nasser ad-Din. So let's say that the Tobacco Revolt coincided with the first concrete involvement in politics by the Shia clerics. And so in order to understand what happened in the later decades, we might go back to these roots and to understand once again the first time in which religion, the politicization of religion, appeared also in politics.
Previously, when we were talking in Bidad's report there, he was talking about the revolution, the coup that was happening in the 1950s. That seemed to centre around who was going to control Iran's oil, and it was foreign governments, particularly the UK, that wanted that control of that oil. This time around, we're talking about whether or not Iran should be allowed to have its own nuclear program. In terms of drawing a parallel, if you like, between the two scenarios, is there enough there to suggest that that would be enough to topple a regime, or is it significantly different enough to suggest that the motivation to do it this time round may not be there?
So let's say that in both cases, we are referring to to a clear goal, the goal to rely on a controllable Iran. Obviously, we are seeing that now is discussed about the nuclear program, and so somehow it's different. But let's say that the goal is very much there, and also the narratives that have been fostered are the same. So, for instance, there is much debates about human rights, women, and of course, these are crucial issues that should be fostered, and especially in a regime like the one in Iran. But once again, for instance, there is kind of a debate about the time of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So that was, of course, the lie of the US in this region. And I want to remind everyone that Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a figure that was despising local Iranian women. Let me quote just 3 lines of what he said to Oriana Fallaci in his famous book, Intervista con la Storia, Interview with History. So this was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi that said, women are important in a man's life only if they are beautiful and charming and keep their femininity. This business of feminism, for instance, what does feminists want? What do you want? You say equality. Oh, I don't want to seem rude, but you are equal in the eyes of the law, but not, excuse my saying so, in intelligence. So nowadays, many people are telling us that somehow going back to the time of the Shah or that kind of approach, so Iran could be a rebirth of Iran. But in practical terms, as historians, we know that that regime was somehow implementing a form of violence that was cutting out any form of